you've attended a historical reenactment or a living history event as a spectator, or even seen videos of it, you might think you already know what reenacting is all about. Maybe it's a bunch of history nerds dressing up in old uniforms. Maybe it's a glorified Halloween party. Maybe it's Comic-Con for history buffs. And honestly, depending on who you ask and who you talk to, there might be a little bit of truth to all of those. But after more than a decade in this hobby, I have found that what people see from the outside is only a small piece of what is actually going on behind the scenes. Behind every good impression is a lot of research, and behind most of the kits are stories, and behind every event is a community of people sharing knowledge, skills, experiences, and sometimes even memories from people who actually lived through the history we're trying to preserve. And if you stick around long enough, reenacting has a funny way of changing you too. You learn from mentors, you develop new skills, you challenge assumptions, you build friendships, you discover interests you never expected to have when you started, and somewhere along the way, you often become a better researcher, a better storyteller, and sometimes even a better person. Recently, I sat down with another living historian and content creator for a conversation about reenacting, research, building impressions, and some of the lessons that we've learned over the years. What you're about to watch is a collection of some of the moments that stood out to me from that conversation. If you'd like to check out my guest's channel, you'll find the information down below in the description. A quick note before we jump into this video: a small portion of my original audio had to be re-recorded due to technical issues. The conversation and information are exactly the same, but if you notice a slight change in the audio quality or how it aligns with the camera footage in a few spots, that is why. With that out of the way, let's get into it.
So you found basically a mentor in the hobby too, which is something that I think naturally will kind of end up happening. You'll find somebody that one or two folks will probably gravitate towards pretty heavily that'll maybe influence some of your purchasing decisions or investment decisions, or that you can bounce ideas off of.
And especially in different areas too. So sometimes there's value in having multiple mentors. One guy is so knowledgeable on bikes, and then another guy who does reenacting who's very knowledgeable about Bakelite, which is really fascinating because you can go to each of these people and learn something new.
Yeah, everybody's gonna wind up and finding that little niche or special interest area, even within the hobby. Like I see you've got armbands sitting in front of you. That's a whole deep dive in and of itself with the wide variation. I know you're making some of those now yourself. So that's definitely a can of worms to open up, and you'll see a crazy assortment of armbands all in one image even, and then a little bit of standardization as time progresses. And so it's definitely useful to like find something that you like, and you will naturally find something that you like that you can kind of become a little bit of the expert on. And you learn a lot about group dynamics. You learn a lot about yourself through this too, especially like inclement weather stuff, right? Like you're gonna suffer with everybody, and everybody's making jokes, and so it's just there's so many unique things to this experience that you really just have to kind of try it. Like there's really no way around that. Something I rarely hear people talk about. You're not gonna get this as an adult in any other hobby, and maybe beyond groups who are like just cosplay groups who travel to conventions together or something, because this is just you're camping together, you're eating all your meals together, you're road tripping. There's nothing quite like this, and there's a lot of bonding through hardship, and like there's a milsim element to this as well, as much as there is that LARP element. And I know a lot of people in the hobby get really I think some of the older guys
allergic
get out of shape when you throw those terms, or would even suggest that these are parallel hobby communities, because they are, and a lot of us attend those conventions too, or we LARP or whatever. So when we're building these first person personas, like, dude, you're LARPing, like it's okay, you know, when you're
and
my Maquis impression, I'm going to base it on the idea that let's say, for example, I'm an attorney in pre-war France. So that would dictate the type of wristwatch I would have, and maybe the type of eyeglasses, and the quality of the clothing that I'm going to have. And so that's LARPing.
And honestly, that approach does generate some of the best historically grounded kits, because when you dig into the history of that occupied France looks like during that time period, there's those occupations that structure what clothing and what experience you had. Like, for example, I prefer to portray someone who's a general laborer because I have a lot of hands-on skills. So as a result, that makes sense, and as a result, I'm trying to pull that into my clothing. Well, another reenactor does more of a farmer. He likes doing a lot of leather working and likes focusing more on that type of thing. So, it's like a wide range. Another guy, I wouldn't be surprised if he eventually goes more of a railway worker, because that passion, and he has restored, actually in real life, restored vintage rail trains. Well, that's actual locomotives and stuff. So that would be a perfect impression for him, that background knowledge.
Well, that's a great story to portray and tell too, because the French railway workers played such an instrumental role in Maquis operations, intelligence gathering, sabotage, even something as simple as just throwing a track, right, one of the switches, and then oops, so it was definitely a big role, and the kits are relatively easy. French labor clothing is readily available. One of those things, kind of look at the photos. There's plenty of photos of those guys, and go from there. Something else I want to hit on too, when we're talking about these kind of unique experiences, and it's less common now in World War II. And 15 years ago, every old guy who came up to your table was a veteran of the Second World War, and that was really an incredible period, sharing stories with me they'd never told their own families in front of their own family often, or if they were by themselves or with their spouse, they would say, I've never told my own family this, when they were kind of wrapping up. One of the wildest experiences I had, I was French Foreign Legion display, and I had some Commonwealth stuff up there. He comes up to the display, doesn't say a word to me, and he starts unbuttoning his shirt, and I'm like, what is this guy doing? So he has this tattoo on his chest of 2 cross-Gurkha knives with like the Canadian Commando, like para wings and everything on his chest. And he was in Southeast Asia. He was a Canadian Commando. One of the smaller dressing that that I had on the table, he's like, yeah, we never carried these because if somebody got shot, like this was just useless. He mentioned a detail about the larger of the 2 British dressings and how they would wedge that into the sling of their Enfield rifles. So there's little opportunities that I had to talk to veterans, but the 2 that will forever be in my memory because they run counter to a lot of reenactors zeitgeist. We asked specifically about white t-shirts. He kind of remembered white t-shirts a little bit, but that was like a big thing with the GI reenactors, especially in Europe, is like if you show up with a white t-shirt, you'd think that the world ended. We asked about like the OD7 field gear, any like the green field gear, and he said, oh yeah, everybody wanted the green field gear because it was the new stuff. And to the GI reenactor of the modern day, everybody, if it's not khaki, it's wrong. It's a funny thing that we talk about, people just kind of falling in line with what other reenactors are doing or saying, and especially when you're doing something as niche as French Resistance and arguably becoming less niche, you're still going to find a lot of that. There's going to be an element where people haven't seen it done before. You have to look outside the box too when you're doing your research on these impressions. Again, vet what you're doing, go to good sources, find good sources. First person accounts are just so useful. The fun of accumulating this knowledge for me, and I believe for you as well, is we like to info dump. So
I love to share it. Yeah, and the thing is too, I've been researching this this impression for I think 14 years now. And there's never been good sources. I took every book that the library had, and it was basic. Most of them were child books. So not much information there. So I've taken all sorts of different avenues. I've had different connections with different people, different experts, even from France, who have worked with me, and connecting all these dots together. But it's that's not easy for someone trying to get started in the impression. It's not okay, the GIs. Now the GI impression is great. I don't mean to bash the GI or the German impression at all. They're cookie cutter. It's a standard military.
It's well
and you touched on this.
Easy.
Yeah. And you can just buy it. The French Resistance impression, well, a lot of those other impressions will chase people away saying it's so pricey. It can be affordable to do the French Resistance.
When it comes to building these kits, it's just don't overthink it. Ask questions. Look at original photos. Northern France is going to be a little more difficult because around Normandy, there is less Maquis activity.
Yep,
Lends
and for good reason.
less photos of the Maquis in Normandy.
Yeah, and it was the first.
That we can jump off of. There's a pretty famous one of one of the senior FTP leaders linking up with some American airborne forces, but you usually have to go a little more inland. So there's just a lot of inferences as to what people up there would have been wearing, a lot of rural farm clothing, because the area that you're portraying is going to dictate too a lot of what your clothing selection is going to be. And southern France is super easy, going back to Speedos or khaki shorts and over a no shirt for guys. You'll see day dresses on women, sandals, you'll see espadrilles all over France, especially southern France. Yeah, this is a pretty simple kit to get into.
And I think that's really what a lot of people miss when they look at historical reenacting from the outside. They see the uniforms, they see the gear, they see the weapons, they see the events. What they don't always see are the years of research behind each of those impressions, the friendships that are built along the way, the mentors who helped guide the new people into the hobby, and the experiences that stay with you long after the event is over. For a lot of us, reenacting started because we were interested in history, but over time, it becomes about so much more than just that. It's about preserving stories. It's about sharing knowledge. It's about challenging assumptions and continually learning along the way. It's about meeting people who push you to become better at your craft and sometimes better as a person. Whether you've been in the hobby for 20 years, or you're just getting started, or you're simply someone who's curious about what goes on behind the scenes, I hope this conversation gave you a better look behind the curtain. If you'd like to see more from my guest, be sure to check out his channel linked down below. And if you had a mentor in the hobby, a memorable experience at an event, or a lesson you've learned through reenacting, I'd love to hear them. Definitely drop them down below in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button. And if you're watching on a mobile device, you might even see an option to hype the video. Give that a click, it helps a lot more than you might think. This is Brave Builds, where history, kit, and reenacting all come together to help us build a better understanding of their bravery, because their stories deserve to be remembered.